put yourself on a luxury expedition cruise for a moment. There's this underlying expectation of managed adventure.
Right, the illusion of safety.
Exactly. You're sailing past these towering icebergs. You're out there watching penguins in their natural habitats. Maybe you're even braving the notorious Drake Passage. It feels wild. It feels untamed.
But you always know there's a warm cabin waiting for you.
Yeah, a warm cabin, a hot meal, a highly trained medical crew just inside those steel doors. It's the modern illusion of conquering nature while being perfectly, completely insulated from it.
I mean, we want to experience the extremes of the globe, but we demand a barrier. We like the wilderness to stay firmly on the other side of the glass.
But then nature breaches the hull, and suddenly that thick layer of insulation it's gone.
Which is exactly what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, right now. As we speak, in May of 2026, there is a very real, incredibly terrifying crisis unfolding off the coast of Africa. A Dutch luxury expedition ship, the MV Hondius, is completely stranded in the ocean.
It's a massive vessel just sitting there.
They are dealing with a deadly viral outbreak on board. Ports are outright refusing them entry, and international health organizations are just scrambling to manage an entirely unprecedented situation.
It's a scenario that tests the absolute limits of our global health infrastructure. I mean, to really understand the panic happening at the macro level, the closed borders, the emergency flights, the diplomatic standoffs, we have to look at the microscopic mechanics.
The virus itself.
Exactly. The biology here is the actual engine driving the fear.
So that is our mission for today's deep dive. We are going to unpack a whole stack of sources surrounding this real-time event. We're combining breaking news reports with deep virology research to give you a really comprehensive understanding of what this virus actually is.
And how it got on the ship.
Right. How on earth it got onto a luxury icebreaker and the massive international standoff it's triggered. We're going to figure out how a microscopic pathogen brought a massive steel ship to a total standstill.
Well, it all starts with a group of viruses that are practically ancient. I mean, they've been evolving silently right alongside their natural hosts for millions of years.
So before we can understand the nightmare on the MV Hondius, we need to understand the biological profile of this killer. We're talking about orthohantavirus, or, as it's more commonly known, hantavirus.
Yeah, hantavirus.
And normally, this is not a pathogen that stalks the high seas. Hantaviruses are naturally found in rodents like mice, rats, voles.
And what's wild is that in these rodents, the virus causes a persistent but completely asymptomatic infection.
So they don't get sick at all?
Not at all. The reservoir host is fine. The mice are running around totally healthy, living their best lives. But they are shedding this virus everywhere.
Through their excretions, right?
Yes, through their feces, their urine, and their saliva. And when those excretions dry out in the environment, the virus particles become aerosolized. They literally get suspended in the dust.
So a human comes along, maybe sweeping out a dusty shed or working in a field.
Or hiking through dense brush. They kick up that invisible dust, and they simply breathe it in.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the survival rate of this virus outside the body is crazy. The research shows it can survive for 10 days at regular room temperature.
Yeah, 10 days just sitting there.
And if it's colder, like down near freezing, it can survive for over 18 days just waiting in the environment. And when a human does breathe it in, the results are devastating. Our sources actually detail two main diseases caused by these viruses, depending entirely on where you are in the world.
Right. Geography completely dictates the disease profile here. So in Africa, Asia, and Europe, you find the old world hantaviruses.
Which cause what exactly?
They typically cause hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome. Basically, it attacks the kidneys, causing severe swelling, internal hemorrhaging, and eventually renal failure.
Oh, wow. And the mortality rate?
It could reach up to 15% depending on the specific strain.
Okay, but then you have the New World hantaviruses. These cause hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, or HPS, and this is where the numbers get genuinely terrifying.
The mortality rate jumps significantly.
Yeah, the case fatality rate for HPS is an astounding 30 to 60%. It attacks the lungs and the heart. The sources say the initial symptoms feel just like a standard flu, fever, muscle ache.
But it rapidly progresses.
Yeah.
It moves to a cardiopulmonary phase, where the lungs literally fill with fluid.
Which leads to sudden respiratory failure and cardiogenic shock.
It is a swift and brutal disease progression. I mean, to understand why it's so lethal, you have to look at what the virus is actually doing to our cells. It primarily targets the vascular endothelial cells.
Those are the cells lining the blood vessels, right?
Exactly, the inside of your blood vessels.
Okay, I want to visualize this thing. If I'm looking at this virus under a microscope, what makes it such an efficient killer once it gets into the bloodstream?
Well, under a microscope, you'd see this spherical particle, and its genome is segmented into 3 distinct parts. You can think of them as 3 separate pieces of an instruction manual.
Okay, 3 pieces.
Right. And the crucial part is the segment that encodes 2 spike glycoproteins on the surface of the virus. These spikes, they form this symmetrical lattice over the particle, and they are highly, highly specialized.
What are they looking for?
They're looking for a very specific protein on human cells called an integrin, which is basically what helps our blood vessels stick together and maintain their structure.
So the virus is looking for a very specific doorway into our cells. It's a lock and key mechanism.
Exactly.
And when the virus picks that lock, it gains entry, but it also disrupts the glue holding the blood vessels together. That is why the blood vessels start to leak. The virus fundamentally compromises the plumbing.
That is the perfect way to look at it. Once those spikes attach and the virus is pulled inside, it hijacks the cell's machinery to replicate itself.
And then what? It bursts out.
The New World hantaviruses actually assemble near the cell membrane and just bud right off the surface, flooding into the bloodstream to infect the next cell. This causes massive systemic vascular leakage.
And in the lungs, that leakage means blood plasma pours into the air sacs.
Yes. The patient essentially drowns from the inside.
God, that's horrifying. So we have an environmental virus that needs dusty barns, rural fields, or rodent nests to infect people.
Right.
But now we have it sitting on a sterile luxury cruise ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. That makes zero biological sense. There are no dusty barns on the MV Hondius.
No, definitely not.
The natural environmental overlap simply does not exist unless the virus on the ship isn't behaving like a normal hantavirus.
What's fascinating here is that anomaly points to something much more alarming happening on board. On May 6, authorities officially confirmed that the ship is dealing with a very specific strain, the Andes virus.
And the Andes strain is normally found in South America.
Right. But the thing that makes this a global emergency is its unique behavioral profile. The Andes strain is the only hantavirus known to undergo human-to-human transmission.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because other hantaviruses hit a dead end in humans. Like, you can't catch SIN number virus from a coughing patient in a hospital bed.
No, you can't.
But the Andes strain can be passed directly from person to person.
We have to look at why it can do that when the others can't. The virology research suggests the Andes strain replicates much more efficiently in the salivary glands and higher up in the upper respiratory tract of humans compared to other strains.
Ah, so it's concentrated right where it can get out.
Exactly. Because it concentrates in those areas, it can be shed through human saliva and airborne droplets from just coughing, talking, or sneezing.
Wait, hold on. Something isn't adding up for me here. You just said it spreads person to person through droplets, but the research notes we looked at explicitly flagged this kind of transmission as extremely rare.
What usually is.
Right. The systemic reviews mention it usually requires highly intimate contact like sexual partners or a family sharing a very tiny confined space over a long period. So how on earth is it jumping between 150 different people across an entire luxury ship to the point of a mass outbreak? I mean, as of May 6, we're looking at 5 confirmed cases, 3 suspected cases, and 3 deaths.
Well, you have to consider the concept of viral load and the unique pressure cooker environment of a modern cruise ship. Even an expedition vessel like the Hondius is essentially a sealed floating building.
Right.
You have 150 people sharing dining halls, narrow corridors, lounges, and most importantly, an enclosed recirculating HVAC system.
The ventilation.
The ventilation. When a virus that sheds via airborne droplets is introduced into a close quarters maritime environment, the rules of rare transmission completely change.
Because they're breathing the same air over and over.
Exactly. In a normal setting, you might walk past an infected person and get a tiny, inconsequential exposure. But on a ship, the continuous recirculation of air turns that rare, intimate contact into inevitable, prolonged mass exposure. The proximity is forced, continuous, and inescapable.
Just put yourself on that ship right now as a passenger. You were told a highly lethal virus with a 30 to 60% mortality rate is actively spreading.
It would be terrifying.
You're ordered to stay in your cabin, limit contact. The crew is frantically distributing hand sanitizer. But the air you are breathing is shared by everyone on your deck. You can't leave the building. The psychological tension would be absolutely suffocating.
The timeline of this tragedy really illustrates how that tension has escalated, too. I mean, the ship left Argentina on April 1st. Just 10 days into the voyage, On April 11, a Dutch man died on board.
And for almost 2 weeks, his body remained on the ship as they sailed across the Atlantic. They didn't reach the British overseas territory of St. Helena until April 24.
Right, that's when his body was finally removed.
Yeah, and his wife, who had been traveling with him, she disembarked there too. This poor woman takes a commercial flight from St. Helena to Johannesburg, South Africa. Then, on April 26, she boards a connecting flight to Amsterdam, but she is removed from the plane before takeoff because her medical state is visibly deteriorating.
And she died in a hospital that exact same day.
The exact same day. It's so fast.
And the chain of infection didn't stop there. The very next day, April 27, a British passenger, who we now know was the ship's own doctor, had to be airlifted from Ascension Island to Johannesburg in critical condition.
And then on May 2, a German woman died on board the ship.
It's just cascading.
It really is. It is rippling out into the global travel network. Just recently, a stewardess who worked on the April 26 flight from Johannesburg to Amsterdam, the flight the Dutch woman was supposed to be on, was hospitalized in the Netherlands with suspected symptoms.
So she had been in contact with the deceased German passenger at some point during the travel chaos.
Yes, it is actively moving through the ship and leaking out into the international aviation system.
Which naturally triggers a massive, frantic epidemiological investigation. Public health officials had to immediately answer a critical question. How did an environmental virus from South America breach the hull of a departing ship in the first place?
Right. To contain an outbreak, you have to find patient 0. The epidemiological detective work here is fascinating. So the MV Hondius departed from Ushuaia, Argentina, which is the southernmost city in the world, on April 1st. They were scheduled for a 24-day Atlantic odyssey, crossing the Southern Ocean to St. Helena.
Right.
The Argentine Health Ministries and the Malbrand Institute teamed up to trace the exact movements of the index cases, the Dutch couple who first showed symptoms.
And their investigation revealed a sprawling 4-month road trip. From November 2025 all the way to April 2026, this couple traveled across Chile, Uruguay, and Argentina.
So they were covering a lot of ground.
A lot of ground. And the leading hypothesis from the investigators is that the couple contracted the virus while they were out birdwatching.
Wow, birdwatching.
Yeah, they were trekking through the exact rural habitats where the rodent carriers live, likely kicking up and inhaling that aerosolized dust we talked about earlier.
But they were completely healthy when they boarded the ship on April 1st. The Argentine authorities noted that no passengers showed any symptoms at the time of departure. So everyone boards, they unpack, they pop the champagne, totally unaware.
Completely oblivious.
The virus is like a microscopic stowaway. It packs its bags, hides in the cellular cargo hold, and just waits.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the virus's biology, that delay makes perfect sense. Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome has a notoriously long and highly variable incubation period.
How long are we talking?
It can range anywhere from 1 to 8 weeks after exposure, before the first flu-like symptoms even appear.
1 to 8 weeks. That is a massive window.
It is. The couple only returned to Argentina from their rural trip in Uruguay 4 days before the ship sailed. This perfectly explains the timeline. They boarded during the early incubation phase, looking and feeling entirely healthy.
Meanwhile, the virus was slowly replicating, picking those cellular locks.
Exactly. But it hadn't triggered the systemic vascular leakage yet. It didn't strike until April 11, 10 days into the voyage.
So the medical mystery of how it got on board is solved. But the human crisis is peaking right now. It has evolved into a massive, tense geopolitical standoff.
The ship is essentially a floating crisis.
Right. On May 3, the MV Hondius docked in Praia, the capital of Cape Verde. The Cape Verdean government tried to help. They set up isolation zones. They sent medical supplies to the port. But we have to look at the reality of the medical demands here.
It's just too much for them.
Yeah, this is a virus causing complex respiratory failure, requiring intensive care and ventilators. Cape Verde simply lacks the vast medical infrastructure required to handle a mass evacuation and critical care operation of that scale.
They recognize their limitations. So the ship's operator made the logical logistical decision to pull anchor and divert north to Tenerife in the Canary Islands.
Because it's Spanish territory.
Right, and it had the advanced European medical facilities necessary to handle a sudden influx of critical HPS patients.
But they hit a brick wall. Fernando Clavijo, the regional president of the Canary Islands, outright refused them entry. He stated publicly that he cannot allow the Hondius to enter the Canaries.
You really have to look at both sides of this impossible situation.
Definitely. And just to be clear, for you listening, we are not taking sides here. We are just objectively reporting what the sources are laying out because this is highly charged. But President Clevio is citing the safety of the islanders. The local population is incredibly fearful.
And the sources point out that the trauma of the COVID-19 pandemic is still very fresh there.
Exactly. They live on an island. An outbreak of a highly lethal, human-transmissible virus is an existential threat to them.
Island populations are uniquely vulnerable to imported pathogens. Once a virus with human-to-human transmission takes root in an isolated geography, containing it becomes exponentially more difficult.
But on the other hand, the World Health Organization is firing back with a very different perspective. The WHO issued a statement declaring that Spain has a moral and legal obligation to assist these stranded people under international maritime and health laws.
Which makes sense from a global health governance standpoint.
Furthermore, they pointed out that there are several Spanish citizens actively trapped on board the ship. So what does this all mean? You have a terrified local population demanding their borders stay closed to protect their own lives, and international law demanding they open them to save the lives of the passengers.
It is a stark ethical dilemma playing out in real time.
Yeah, it is.
This raises an important question about the extreme fragility of our global health infrastructure. We like to think that with modern medicine, early warning systems, and international protocols, we are fully prepared for biological threats.
Right, are we?
Well, this scenario proves that a single luxury ship carrying just 150 people and a rare pathogen can completely overwhelm local governments and force agonizing, highly political border closures. It shows how quickly the entire system fractures under pressure.
And while this political standoff is happening at the macro level, desperate, high-wire medical evacuations are taking place in the background. They are using specialized air ambulances to pull the most critical patients off the ship and fly them to the Netherlands and Switzerland.
Like the ship's doctor.
Exactly. Remember the ship's doctor who was evacuated? Well, in a terrifying twist, these flights haven't been smooth. On May 6, an air ambulance carrying a Dutch national was flying toward the Netherlands when it experienced a life support system failure midair.
Oh, that's a nightmare. A critical electrical failure on a plane carrying a patient who likely requires intense, continuous respiratory support.
Up in the air.
Right. And given the vascular leakage in the lungs caused by HPS, every second without that support is a literal fight against drowning in one's own plasma.
They actually had to perform an emergency diversion to Gran Canaria just to wait for a replacement aircraft. The sheer panic of that moment at 30,000 feet is unimaginable.
Absolutely terrifying.
And as of May 6, despite the firm refusal from the Spanish authorities, the MV Hondias has pulled its anchor again. It left Cape Verde and is currently sailing directly toward the Canary Islands.
They're forcing the issue.
They are. But before they left, 3 medical professionals, including 2 epidemiologists, boarded the ship. They are sailing directly into the crisis zone to investigate the exact scope of the spread before the ship reaches European waters.
It is a high-stakes race against time.
Really?
Those epidemiologists need to map the entire transmission network within the ship's microenvironment. They have to understand exactly how the virus is moving through the ventilation and the passenger interactions before the vessel arrives at the port in Tenerife.
Taking a step back, look at the incredible, terrifying journey we've tracked today. We started in the microscopic world. A virus, perfectly evolved to survive quietly in the dust of rodent habitats, with a segmented genome and specialized spike proteins picking the locks of our blood vessels.
An ancient biological mechanism.
Yeah. And then we traced how one specific mutation, the Andes strain, which is capable of replicating in human salivary glands, made the leap into a host during a quiet birdwatching trip. From there, a long biological incubation period turned a healthy traveler into a microscopic stowaway, bringing this pathogen onto a sealed luxury cruise ship.
And now, recirculated air has escalated it into a mass human-to-human transmission event.
Right, causing an international standoff playing out in the Atlantic Ocean right now, complete with closed ports, mid-air emergencies, and profound debates over borders.
It emphasizes how deeply interconnected our world really is. I mean, the boundaries we imagine exist between a rural field in South America and a pristine luxury suite on a Dutch expedition ship, those boundaries are an absolute illusion.
They don't exist.
Not at all. Our global travel networks are so relentlessly efficient that an ancient rodent-borne virus can become an international maritime crisis in a matter of weeks.
It feels almost like a movie plot. but it is a very stark reminder of our relationship with the natural environment. You go out looking for an adventure, you want to conquer the wild, and sometimes you bring the wilderness back with you in ways you never intended.
There is one final, lingering thought from the virology data that is perhaps the most chilling aspect of all this.
Oh, what's that?
We discussed earlier how hantaviruses have a segmented genome, those 3 separate pieces of RNA instruction manuals. Well, because of this modular structure, they are highly capable of something called genetic recombination and reassortment.
What does that mean, practically?
It means if 2 different strains of a hantavirus infect the same host at the exact same time, they can actually swap their genetic segments to create an entirely new hybrid virus.
Wait, swap segments, like building blocks?
Exactly.
Okay.
So consider this scenario. If the MV Hondius does force its way into a major European port city, and this highly transmissible Andes strain somehow makes landfall and mixes with a local old world virus residing in the city's rat population,
Oh, no.
could it reassort? Could we see the birth of a hybrid virus that combines the easy human-to-human droplet transmission of the Andes strain with the entirely different kidney-destroying pathology of an old world hantavirus?
Wow.
It is a chilling, evolutionary possibility that public health officials are undoubtedly sweating over as they watch that ship approach.
The idea that the virus isn't just spreading, but could actively upgrade itself, like swapping out Lego pieces if it reaches the wrong port, that is a genuinely terrifying thought to leave on.
Well, on that sobering note, we want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive, whether you're listening on your commute or at home. We hope we've helped make sense of this incredibly complex, unfolding crisis. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll catch you on the next one.